Episode 13, When the Heart Goes Quiet, Echoes Without Scott. Hey everyone, welcome back to Finding Light in Darkness. This episode's a bit different, and if you've been following along with us for a while now, you'll feel it too. There's a certain silence in the room tonight, a kind of wait, a pause between words that we're not trying to fill too quickly. Because Scott's not with us right now, not on this one, and trust me, we feel that absence with every breath. Scott's been walking through something really heavy lately. After the response from Margaret, that second letter she sent, raw and gut-wrenching, it cracked something wide open inside him. And not just about Margaret, it triggered a whole echo from his own past. Things he's barely let himself say out loud, even here. And honestly, that's what this podcast is about. It's not just stories, it's not performance. This is real-life healing. And healing doesn't always walk in a straight line. Sometimes it curls up in the corner and says, not today. And that's okay. So today, it's just me, Michael. And I've asked Patrick to join me again. You'll remember him from episode 5.5, and maybe even more so from the shadows of this podcast, where he's been one of Scott's biggest supports.
Thanks, mate. Yeah. When Scott rang me, or I should say, when he finally answered after days of silence, I could hear it in his voice. He didn't have to say anything. The tremble was there, the weight. And honestly, it broke me a bit too, Margaret's story, her words. They didn't just stir something in Scott, they shook something loose in all of us who've ever felt invisible, ever felt like we were screaming inside, but no one could hear it. Scott said something that's haunted me since. He said, she misses being seen as a little girl, and I miss being loved as a little boy. Mate, that's not just trauma talking. That's a soul gasping for air. And that's why we're here tonight, to hold that space, not to replace Scott, no one could, but to keep the light on for him and for anyone else listening who's sitting in that same dark.
Tonight's episode isn't scripted in the traditional sense. There's no neat bow, no checklist. What we've got is grief, reflection, and maybe a bit of grace if we're lucky. We'll still weave in the themes Scott loves, Einstein's thoughts on time, the loop, the mental cycles we get stuck in, but we'll also talk about that ache, the one that shows up when the person who usually carries the torch can't lift it anymore. We'll start with what happened, what triggered Scott's silence. Then we'll unpack the real meaning of being unseen, of being unheard, especially as kids, and how sometimes it's not the loud trauma that shapes us, it's the quiet absence.
We invite you to sit with us, not just as listeners, but as part of this, your family now. And sometimes family just sits beside each other in the dark, no words needed. So let's walk into this silence together, not to fix it, but to feel it. Because sometimes the heart doesn't break with a bang, it just goes quiet.
I want to take us back for a moment to Margaret's second letter. The one she sent after her first message had already rocked us to the core. This one, it wasn't just pain. It was her truth poured out in pure, trembling honesty. She wrote, I miss being seen as a little girl. And there's something so powerful in that sentence. Not, I want to be seen, not, I'm angry I wasn't seen, but I miss it. Which means, at one point she was, maybe only for a moment. Maybe only in her imagination, maybe in front of a mirror, dancing in a dress no one else ever saw. But she had that vision of herself, and she lost it. And it shattered Scott. Because when he read those words, he didn't just see Margaret, he saw himself.
Yeah, that line hit like a brick. I remember Scott calling me late that night. It was maybe midnight. He didn't even say hello, just whispered, I used to sit under a blanket with a torch and pretend I didn't exist. Mate, how do you even respond to that? He wasn't just remembering something, he was back there, in that moment. A little boy, hiding under fabric, trying to disappear. Not because someone yelled at him, but because no one saw him at all. And that's something a lot of people don't get about trauma. It's not always explosive. Sometimes it's silent. It's not always what was done to you. It's what was withheld.
Exactly. And silence can be violent in its own way. When you grow up not being seen, not being validated, not being loved in the language your heart understands, Your body keeps growing, but part of your soul doesn't. It stays stuck. That's what Scott always means when he says, "My body is 47, but parts of me are still 7. That's not a metaphor. That's a map of broken development, a timeline of places where love never arrived. And that's where Margaret and Scott overlap. Two very different lives, two very different stories, but both built on that quiet ache of being misseen, or not seen at all.
I think that's why Scott needed to step away from the mic. He wasn't just tired. He was drowning in a memory that had never left him. He'd just gotten good at walking around it. But Margaret's words cracked the floorboards. He told me, "I can handle pain. But I can't handle being invisible again." And that's what this episode is about. The invisible wounds. The ones that don't bleed. The ones people say you should be over by now. But how do you get over something you never got under? How do you heal a scar you were never allowed to show?
Tonight, we're not here to answer those questions with quick fixes. We're just here to honor them, to echo them, to whisper into the dark that we see you. If you've ever felt invisible, like the people who were supposed to love you just looked right through you, this episode is for you. Not to heal it all at once, but maybe just to name it. And in naming it, maybe you'll feel a little less alone.
You know what stuck with me the most, Michael? It wasn't just what Margaret said about herself. It was what it unlocked in Scott about his Nan, that woman, his safe place. He told me once she was the only person who ever truly saw me. And I think when she died, I stopped existing. That hit me right in the gut. Because grief like that doesn't just come from the loss of a person, it comes from the loss of being seen, of being loved in a way that felt whole. And when that love disappears, it's like your whole identity vanishes with it. Scott didn't just lose his Nan, he lost his anchor. The only proof he ever had that he mattered. And when someone grows up feeling like love is conditional, only shown in fragments or never at all, one person who sees you can mean everything.
I remember him talking about her on a walk we took once, just the two of us, no mics, no planning. He said, "She had a softness I never saw in anyone else." Then he got quiet. He didn't cry. He just looked down at the ground for a long time. That silence, it was sacred. It was him standing at a grave inside himself, one he's never really let anyone near. Until now. And you're right, Margaret's letter opened it back up. It reminded him what it felt like to be loved in the way a child should be loved, without question, without condition, and without shame.
Yeah, that kind of love, it's rare. And when you've had even a drop of it, and then it's gone, everything else feels colder by comparison. Scott once said, "I'd trade every house I've ever lived in just to sit on the lounge beside her one more time." And that wasn't nostalgia, that was need. The kind of aching need that never grows up. That's the thing with trauma, especially childhood trauma. It doesn't age, it just waits. And sometimes it waits decades before finally speaking through a letter from someone else's pain.
And when it speaks, it doesn't ask permission. It shows up in the middle of the night. It whispers through memories you thought were gone. And it reminds you that healing isn't linear, it's cyclical. Scott used to say that. Healing's not a ladder, it's a loop, and sometimes I step right back into the version of me I thought I'd outgrown. That's where Einstein comes in again. That whole idea, time is a stubbornly persistent illusion. Scott lives that. He feels that. Because to him, time didn't move forward after Nan died. It folded in on itself. And when Margaret wrote about being unseen by her father, it folded again.
And that's why this episode matters, because some of you listening, maybe you've got your own Nan, your own version of love you lost too soon. Maybe you were never seen by your mum, or your dad, or anyone. Maybe you're still hiding under that blanket with the torch like Scott did. If that's you, we're not here to tell you it gets better overnight. But we are here to say this. You exist. You matter. You're not invisible here. And Scott? He might not be on this mic tonight, but every word we speak, he's in it. He's the reason we're lighting this torch in the dark.
You know what's strange, Patrick? How loud silence can be. I don't mean the kind of silence that comes when the TV's off or the fridge stops humming. I mean the emotional kind. The kind that follows you through a room, even when someone else is there. That's the silence Scott talks about when he describes growing up. He once said, "I could be sitting 3 feet from my mom, and it still felt like I was in a soundproof box." And that feeling never really left him, not even as an adult. That's the thing about emotional neglect. It doesn't scream, it doesn't bruise, it just empties. It teaches you to lower your volume, to ask for less, to feel like too much even when you say nothing at all.
Exactly. And eventually, that silence becomes your inner voice. You stop asking to be loved. You stop expecting to be chosen. You start believing that invisibility is normal, and that any time someone does see you, it must be a mistake. I think that's part of what broke Scott after Margaret's second message. He wasn't just feeling empathy, he was feeling recognition. He saw that same quiet suffering in her, that same craving to just be called by the right name, seen in the right way and held without having to earn it. And I think it triggered something ancient in him, a kind of pain that predates adulthood, a wound from before language.
We don't talk about that enough, how old pain can be. We assume trauma only starts when we understand it, but a child doesn't need to know words like abandonment or neglect to feel abandoned and neglected. Their body knows. Scott's body remembers. That's what PTSD is, right? Not just memory, but memory trapped in muscle, in breath, in instinct. He always says, "My anxiety doesn't come from nowhere. It's a flare going off from a place I've been before, even if I don't consciously remember the trip."
Yeah, and that's why time is such a tricky thing when it comes to trauma. Einstein said, "The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." And for people like Scott and Margaret, that illusion isn't comforting. It's confusing, because their bodies are constantly reliving moments their minds try to leave behind. It's like Scott once told me, "I'm not living in 2025. I'm just carrying 1985 around with me wherever I go." That's the loop. That's the time trap. That's why healing feels impossible some days, because the wound isn't in the past. It's right here.
So tonight, we're not offering fake hope or neat timelines. We're not going to tell you time heals all wounds, because Scott would be the first to say, that's bullshit. What we will say is this: sometimes healing doesn't come from time passing. It comes from someone finally witnessing your pain. And that's what this episode is. It's us witnessing Margaret, witnessing Scott, and maybe, if you let us, witnessing you.
Michael, you know what breaks me the most about Margaret's second email? It wasn't even the sadness. It was how much hope was still buried in it, this aching, vulnerable, trembling kind of hope. The kind that says, "I still want my father to love me, even though I don't think he ever will." That hit me like a sledgehammer, because that's not just longing, that's bravery. That's a heart still reaching out in the dark, even after being burned 100 times. She said, "I've told him I'm a woman, a big girl now, and I think he's going to disown me." And my God, can we just pause and breathe that in? How much strength does it take to speak your truth knowing it might cost you love?
It's enormous. And yet somehow, we don't call it that. We don't give trans women like Margaret enough credit for the courage it takes to simply be, especially when that being goes against everything their family told them was acceptable. Scott read that part of the letter and just stopped talking. He sat back, put his hand over his mouth, and didn't say a word for 5 minutes. Then finally he whispered, "She just wants her dad to see her." That was it. Not approval, not applause, just recognition. And I think that's what unlocked a whole storm in Scott's chest. Because he's been chasing that same thing, just in a different form, his entire life.
It's funny, isn't it? How our wounds may look different on the outside, different gender, different identity, different stories. But at the core, they're the same craving to be held without being told to change. Scott used to say, "I don't want to be fixed, I just want to be felt." And that's exactly what Margaret is asking for too. It's also exactly what most of us who grew up unseen are still trying to name. It's not about being perfect, it's about being visible, about someone saying, "I see you as you are, and I'm not leaving."
That's what this show is trying to be. Not a solution, not a lecture, but a mirror. A place where someone, maybe you listening right now, hears your pain spoken out loud for the first time. We know we can't fix what was broken, but maybe we can help name it. And naming it, that's the first rebellion against the silence. So, to Margaret, if you're listening right now, this whole segment is for you. And for every daughter who was never called daughter. For every son who was told to man up instead of cry. For every child who became an adult still waiting to be chosen. You're not wrong for needing what you never got. You're not weak for still aching. You're not alone anymore.
And Scott, if you're listening to this later, when you're ready, I hope you know you were the first person who made me feel seen. You made it okay to talk about grief and trauma and fear without pretending we had it all together. So it's our turn now. We're holding this space until you come home. And you will come home, because hearts like yours, they don't stay quiet forever.
So, let's talk about the loop. Not just metaphorically, but in the most lived, breath-by-breath way Scott has described it over and over again. He calls it the Einstein loop, the idea that time doesn't actually pass, that it bends, folds, doubles back. And when trauma is involved, it doesn't move at all. That's why sometimes you can be standing in a supermarket or mowing the lawn or lying on the couch in 2025. But inside your body, you're right back in 1993 or 1986 or the day you lost your nan. You don't remember the pain. You relive it.
Exactly. And most people around you don't even notice it's happening. They think you're just being distant or moody or antisocial. But the truth is, you're time traveling. That's what Scott means when he says he doesn't trust time. He doesn't mean clocks or calendars. He means that you can't count on distance to heal something that's still happening inside you. He once said to me, "My body doesn't know she died in 2016. Every August 4th, it wakes up like it's that day again." And that's what trauma does. It turns anniversaries into battlegrounds.
Yeah, and you can't logic your way out of that. You can journal, meditate, even do exposure therapy, and all of those things help. But at the end of the day, the body keeps its own calendar, and sometimes all it takes is a smell, a sound, a phrase like Margaret's, and suddenly that loop yanks you back in. Scott calls it emotional gravity, and when it hits, it pulls everything down with it. Your mood, your hope, your energy, even your sense of self.
And that's what happened this week. Margaret's words were a gravitational pull, back to a time Scott thought he'd made peace with. But peace isn't permanent when your soul is still looking for a parent who never came. That's the hidden truth of survival. It's not just about making it through the storm. It's about carrying the memory of it in your chest for the rest of your life and still choosing to step outside when the sky looks the same. That's bravery. That's exhaustion. That's real.
And maybe that's why this podcast matters more than ever right now. Because Scott isn't just talking about healing. He's showing what it really looks like. And this part, the silence, the stepping back, the hiding under the emotional duna, this is healing too. Not everything has to be loud. Not every fight needs a speech. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pause.
So if you're in your own loop right now, caught in the same thought, the same fear, the same ache from 30 years ago, just know, you're not broken. You're just still there. And being still there doesn't mean you're not moving forward. It means you're human. It means you're real. And it means you deserve compassion, not a deadline.
There's something Scott said once that I haven't been able to shake since. He told me, I don't want to walk forward. I just want to go back and fix it. Be the son they'd love. Be the kid they'd want. And I remember sitting with that for a long time, because it's heartbreaking, but it's also universal. That desire to rewrite our beginnings, to go back into the past like an emotional editor and cut out the parts that made us feel unloved. But here's the thing, and I wish Scott could hear this right now. You were never the problem. You didn't need to be rewritten. You needed to be received.
That's it. You didn't fail to be lovable. Someone else failed to see your love. There's a massive difference. Scott's always carried this weight like it's his fault his parents didn't love him properly. But that's what neglected kids do. We blame ourselves because it's safer than believing the world is broken. And that's what I want to say to Scott now, and to anyone listening who's still blaming their inner child for what their caregivers couldn't give. You are always enough. You are always worthy. And your value doesn't expire just because someone else never noticed it.
You know, Scott used to talk about a version of the footprints in the sand story, one he rewrote in his own voice. It wasn't polished, it wasn't poetic, it was raw. He said, "I walk along the beach with the Lord, and I looked at the Lord, looked at the ground, at the beach. I said to the Lord, 'Why is there only one set of footprints?' The Lord come back and said to me, 'I'm not the one looking forward. You've already been back there. There's only one way to go, and that's forward.'" Man, I get chills every time I think of that.
It's not just a spiritual metaphor, it's a map of Scott's heart. Even when he wants to go backward, to undo the pain, to be that better kid. The truth is, he already survived it. He already walked that stretch of beach. The footprints are his. The proof is him. And right now, even though he's not here with us in voice, his journey is still etched in every step this show takes.
So, to anyone listening who feels like you've been walking alone, we want you to picture your own beach, your own set of steps. Even when you felt invisible, even when it felt like love forgot your name, you still kept walking. And that's the miracle of survival. It doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like getting out of bed on the 4th of August, even when your chest feels like a coffin.
Sometimes it looks like crying in your car before going into the supermarket. Sometimes it looks like sending a letter, like Margaret did, even when you're sure it'll break you. And sometimes it looks like stepping away from a podcast mic because the next word might be the one that finally makes you fall apart. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. And Scott, if you're hearing this later, mate, we see your footprints. We see you.
There's a shadow that's always followed Scott, and he's been brave enough to let us see it from time to time. It's not just about his childhood or grief. It's about being a dad who's been separated from his daughter. And in the quiet of this episode, that shadow feels even heavier, because when Scott read Margaret's line, "I just want my father to love me," it cracked open that wound he's been carrying for years, the one where his own daughter grows older without him. He told me once, "She's turning 29 soon, and I haven't been in her life. I missed it all. Birthdays, milestones, everything." And then he paused and said, "I still call her beautiful every day, in my head."
That right there, that's the kind of grief that doesn't scream. It whispers. And it doesn't come from abandonment or rejection. It comes from absence. The kind of absence that wraps around your lungs when you know someone you love is out there, living their life, and you're not in the photo. Scott told me, "I don't want to interrupt her world. I just want her to know I love her. That's it. That's the whole sentence." And I think part of why Margaret's message shattered him was because it echoed the same wish, just flipped around. One daughter wanting her father to see her. One father aching to say, "I do."
And that's where things get complicated, don't they? Because hurt doesn't always come from bad people doing bad things. Sometimes it comes from lost people trying their best while drowning in their own pain. Scott's never denied his mistakes. He carries them like bricks in a backpack. But he's also never stopped hoping, never stopped loving his daughter from a distance. He once said, "Even if I never get to hold her hand again, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I'd be someone she could be proud of if we ever met." That's love. Quiet, steady, constant.
And that's the thing about Scott. He might be broken in places, but his love, it's whole. So to his daughter, if you're ever listening, or if someone sends this your way, your dad sees you. He loves you. And he never stopped. Not once. Even on the days he was scraping carpet with cardboard or mowing lawns at midnight just to keep breathing. He was thinking of you, whispering your name between sobs, wishing he could go back and be everything you deserved.
There's no perfect ending to a story like that. No ribbon, no closure. But there is truth. And the truth is this: some love never left. It just got stuck behind grief. So to all the fathers listening who feel like they failed, To all the daughters who feel unseen, this part of the podcast is for you. Let it be your bridge. Let it be your proof. And if nothing else, let it be the soft voice in your heart saying, I'm still here. I never stopped loving you.
And Scott, you may be silent right now, but in this moment your love is loud. We hear it, we feel it, and we'll keep carrying it until you're ready to speak again.
There's something Scott once said that stays with me like an old scar. He said, the hardest part of being invisible is that eventually you start doing it to yourself. And man, isn't that the truth? At some point, it's not just that others can't see you, it's that you start erasing yourself before they even get the chance. You stop showing emotion. You silence your opinions. You shrink in rooms that never made space for you in the first place. And you start believing that being unseen is safer than being rejected.
That's it. You build a mask, not for protection, but for permission. To exist. And it starts young. For Scott, it started under a blanket. For Margaret, it started in a mirror. For me, it was my voice. I remember being told, don't talk so much, don't be so sensitive, don't cry in front of people. So I stopped, and for years I thought that was maturity, but it was just fear. Fear of being too much. Scott calls it pre-rejection living. It's when you reject yourself first, just to avoid the pain of someone else doing it later.
And that's what makes Margaret's story so powerful, because she didn't erase herself, even when it would have been easier. She wrote to her father. She told him who she really is, not for validation, not for praise, but for truth. And that truth, I'm a woman, a big girl now, was said in the face of possible rejection. That takes strength I can't even put into words. That takes the kind of courage most of us never develop.
And that's what this episode's about. Not fixing the wound, not denying it, but acknowledging that it exists, and that we've all had to bury parts of ourselves just to survive. Scott buried his need to be held. Margaret buried her girlhood. His daughter might be burying questions she's too scared to ask. But tonight, for just a moment, we're digging them up. We're brushing off the dust. And we're saying, you still matter. Even the parts you locked away.
And maybe that's the gift of this podcast, even in Scott's absence. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to have all the answers. It just has to be honest. And right now, the honest truth is this. Scott isn't here because the pain got too loud, and instead of running from it, he paused. He gave himself what most of us never do. Permission to be quiet. Permission to not explain. Permission to fall apart without having to turn it into a lesson right away.
And that's what healing sometimes looks like. Not a sunrise, not a finish line. Just stillness. And even in this stillness, Scott's voice is with us. Not through a microphone, but through the stories he's left behind, through Margaret, through his daughter, through the people who write in, saying things like, this podcast saved my life. That's not performance, that's legacy. And even in silence, Scott's legacy is speaking loud and clear.
You know what I think we overlook sometimes, Patrick? That survival isn't always heroic. It's not some grand dramatic movie moment where someone rises up with music swelling in the background. Most of the time, survival looks like Scott, alone in his unit, curtains drawn, phone off, lying in bed with tears sliding down the side of his face into his pillowcase, and no one there to see it. But he didn't give up, and that matters. He didn't post, he didn't record, but he stayed, and that, right there, is the quietest kind of strength.
Absolutely. We don't give enough credit to the people who stay, the ones who don't have a crowd cheering them on, who don't have a partner rubbing their back or a best mate checking in every hour. People like Scott, they survive in the cracks, in the unseen spaces, in the in-between hours where loneliness hits like a freight train. He told me once, sometimes I don't even know why I'm still here. I just keep waking up. And mate, that's enough. Waking up is enough. Breathing is enough.
And there's something sacred about that kind of living. Because when you've been invisible most of your life, when you've been forgotten, overlooked, pushed aside, continuing to exist is an act of defiance. Scott doesn't always realize that. But he is defiant. He defies every statistic that said he'd be gone, every voice that told him he was worthless, every moment when grief said, "There's no point." And I think he keeps going not because he's healed, but because somewhere deep down, he knows others are watching. Others need to know that staying is possible.
Exactly. He doesn't just survive for himself. He survives for Margaret, for Max, for Caroline, for every single person who writes in and says, "I thought I was the only one." That's what makes this podcast more than just a show. It's a lifeline. And even in silence, especially in silence, that lifeline still holds. Scott doesn't need to speak today to be heard. His life is the message.
So if you're listening right now and your heart feels heavy, if you're lying in your own quiet space, wondering if anyone would notice if you stopped showing up, this is your reminder. We would. You matter. You are not invisible here, and your pain is not too much for us. We've sat with Scott through his storms. We'll sit with you through yours.
And if no one's ever said it before, let us say it now. We're proud of you, not for what you've achieved, not for what you've overcome, but for simply staying, for choosing to wake up one more time, for breathing through another day, for not letting the silence be the end. You're still here, and that means there's still hope.
There's something Scott shared with me a while back that I think we need to talk about tonight, especially with him not here. It was a resource that genuinely changed his life, and not in a cheesy quick fix kind of way. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it met him where he was, alone, scared, and looking for something, anything that might understand him. It's called This Way Up. And Scott didn't find it in a therapist's office. He found it on a screen, quietly, in his own time, in his own space, which, let's be honest, is how most of us find help when we're barely holding it together.
Yeah. And he didn't even tell me at first. Scott said he stumbled across This Way Up one night when the silence in his flat got too loud, when the walls started pressing in and the thoughts were circling like sharks. He Googled something like online help with anxiety that's real, and somehow ended up there, and he told me it felt like someone finally spoke my language. Slow, calm, honest, no pressure. Because what This Way Up offers isn't just information, it's understanding. They get what it feels like to be caught in the loop, to be overwhelmed by panic that doesn't have a name, to feel like a burden even to yourself.
Scott said it was one of the first times he didn't feel like a patient, didn't feel like a case number. He felt like a person, someone who could take small steps without being rushed or shamed. And that's huge, because when you're dealing with PTSD, anxiety, depression, all these things Scott lives with every single day, what you need most isn't someone yelling, "You've got to fix this." What you need is someone whispering, "We'll go at your pace. You're not broken, you're just hurting, and you don't have to do this alone." That's what This Way Up gave him.
And it wasn't just about the tools, it was the tone. Scott said, "It didn't talk down to me, it talked beside me." That's what made the difference, because a lot of us, especially those of us with childhood trauma or long-term mental health struggles, we're hypersensitive to being patronized. We shut down the minute something feels like it's trying to fix us. But This Way Up, it met him where he was, barefoot, broken, unsure, and said, "Let's start here. Not tomorrow, not when you're better. Right now."
And look, Scott's not the kind of guy to plug something unless it really helped. So, if you're listening and you're feeling like you're drowning, if the thought of calling a hotline feels like too much, if walking into a clinic feels impossible, start with something like This Way Up. It's private, it's gentle, and it doesn't ask you to be anyone but who you are. Scott always said, "I didn't need a savior, I needed a map, and this gave me one."
So here's what we'll do. We'll put the link in the show notes. We'll say it out loud again at the end of the episode, because maybe this is the nudge someone out there needs. Scott might be silent tonight, but his journey is still saving lives. And part of that journey is knowing where to reach when the world goes quiet. This Way Up isn't the whole solution, but sometimes it's the first hand reaching back. And that's where healing starts.
So, here we are, the end of a different kind of episode, one that didn't follow the usual script, one that didn't include Scott's voice, but still echoed his heart in every single breath. If you've been listening from the beginning, or even if this is your first time, you probably felt it too. The silence, the stillness, that gentle ache that hangs in the room when someone important is missing. And yet, Scott's not really gone, is he? He's here, in the shape of every story we told, in the softness of every word we shared about Margaret, about his daughter, about Nan, in every moment we paused and just felt.
Scott gave us more than his story. He gave us a language, one we didn't know how to speak before, a way to name the invisible pain, the childhood echoes, the loops we get stuck in. And tonight we spoke that language for him, not to replace his voice, but to honour it, to protect it, to remind him and everyone listening that taking a step back doesn't mean disappearing. It just means breathing. It means healing on your own terms. It means you matter enough to pause.
So if you're someone who feels like Scott, someone who's curled up in the dark, holding your breath, waiting for the storm to pass, we're talking to you right now. You're not forgotten, you're not invisible, and your story doesn't end in silence. There are people who care. There are hands reaching back. There are maps like This Way Up. There are lifelines like this podcast. You are never as alone as your thoughts say you are.
And to Scott, brother, you might be off the mic, but your voice is louder than ever. This episode was a love letter to your strength, a tribute to the footprints you've left on our hearts. And when you're ready, when the quiet breaks and you feel the light come back, we'll be here. Holding space, keeping your seat warm, and reminding the world who you are. Not just a survivor, not just a storyteller, but someone who made us all feel less alone.
We'll wrap this up the way Scott always does, with love, with truth, and with a reminder. If you're struggling, please reach out to someone. And if you don't know where to start, try This Way Up. Try Lifeline. Try telling a friend, I'm not okay. Because you are worth helping. You are worth hearing. You are worth everything.
Here are those crisis resources, and we'll say them slow, because they matter. Lifeline 1 31114. Suicide Callback Service 1300659467. Beyond Blue 1300224636. Men's Line Australia 1300789978. 13 YARN for First Nations people. 139276. And if you want to reach out to Scott directly, even just to say thanks or me too, email him at chatwithscottfindthelight@gmail.com.
This isn't goodbye. This is just a pause. And sometimes, when the heart goes quiet, it's only gathering strength to beat louder than ever before. We'll see you next time. And until then, stay with us. Stay breathing. Stay walking. Stay here. Because the world is better with you in it.
Soul searching, fall apart, tunnel vision, hiding in the dark. Well, I ain't gonna holler before I really bleed. Salvation or quick fix remedy. You said I never could change. I thought I never could change. They said I never could change. Damn right, never would. Leave the light on. Leave the light on. Just leave the light on. Yeah, the light on. If I'll ever change, been dreaming of Nashville, Tennessee, while the cold here in Sweden got the best of me. Well, haven't I got better things to think about than that? Like deadlines, rent's due, bills pile up, family day in, day out, the clock's mocking me, getting old, oh, got the kids deserve so much more than this, gotta get rich. You said I never could change. I thought I never could change. They said I never could change. Damn right, I never would.